Our next presentation is by Dr. Henrietta Mann, and we're very grateful that she was willing to join us via Zoom. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for those of you that invited me. I certainly would have loved to have made the trip with you to this place where our ancestors were incarcerated in penitentiary-like quarters, because that was something that their jailer, Richard Henry Pratt, was fascinated by. Institutions of his time. They could not be called prisoners of war because the United States federal government could not imprison its so-called wards. And so they were captives, whatever you want to call them. I am honored to be a part of this presentation today, and I would like to acknowledge the governor of the Cheyenne and Arapaho Tribes of Oklahoma for making this event possible. I would like to also acknowledge Mr. Gordon Yellowman, who has long worked in the Cultural and Heritage Program of the Cheyenne and Arapaho nations of Oklahoma. He continues the kind of style of art that had its creation at this place called Fort Marion. I would also like to acknowledge our Historic Preservation Officer, Mr. Max Bear. I would also like to say hello to my little niece, Tracy Whiteshirt, a direct descendant of Macon Medicine, who was a sun dancer, as she is. And for those that know our language, a sun dancer, a male sun dancer, is called Ohuehetan. That was what he was known by, and that is what he told Pratt his name was. And of course, it got corrupted in the English form so that it finally comes out and ended up Okerhager. He was making medicine, taken from the fact that he participated in his nation's ceremonies, was also a chief. He was a member of the Bowstring Society. He was a minister. He was the first person to become a deacon in the Episcopal Church, and the only Indian today that has been extended sainthood by the Episcopal Church. I was lucky in 1986 to help my relatives, the White Shields, Pendletons, celebrate his first feast day at the National Cathedral, the Cathedral of Presidents. It was auspicious that one of our own, a saint, have his feast day celebrated at that place where presidential services are held, and is the National Cathedral. I got to carry the Christian elements, as did my aunt, as relatives of Creator. And I remember Lawrence Hart preaching the sermon at the National Cathedral, much of it in our language. I would like to begin by assuring everybody and reiterating for those of you present that the Cheyennes are a people of peace. This way of life came to us out of the sacred center of the universe, located in Nuawas, Bear Butte, on the periphery of the Black Hills in South Dakota. Nuawas is a spiritual center of Cheyenne universe, where this good Cheyenne man called Sweet Medicine was called, and who was taught for 4 years within that sacred mountain all that it is to be Tittistis, to be Cheyenne, our council of 44 peace chiefs, our warrior societies, our law ways as a people, our value systems. Everything about us as Cheyenne peoples comes from that sacred mountain. And it is there that our warrior societies came into existence. The same warrior societies that many of those that were taken captive Fort Marion belong. Bacon Medicine, as I have said, was a member of the Bowstring Society. Others were members of the Council of 44 Peace. Peace was a way of life for us as statistics. We know that we stood as obstacles to the realization of what we can call manifest destiny. We were obstacles that stood in the way of that progress. So that those that came to live with us, and we knew that they would come, that these strangers would come to us from the direction from which the sun rises. And they would come to our lands and they would bring strange things with them. And one of the things that they would bring would be a long stick that speaks with the voice of thunder, a rifle. They would also bring something with them, we were told by this good Cheyenne man, that looked like sand, but tastes very sweet. This good man told us that these strangers that we call Vietnam, the Anglo people of this country today, the Vietnam, would want our land, and they would take it. And they did, because they had to manifest their destiny, because they believed that their God gave them the entire world, all earth, to own and to dominate. They took our land in 5 treaties. The first treaty in 1825 was a treaty of peace and friendship, followed by the Great Horse Creek Treaty of 1851, which gave us a huge area of land as Cheyennes, as the Tittistis and Ananoke, as Arapahos. The land that we reserved for ourselves, our use, were areas of land that straddled the current 4 states of Wyoming, Nebraska, Colorado, and Kansas, Washington, and the entire Rocky Mountain Eastern Front. The Cheyenne and Arapaho nations were huge land barriers. They had the land over which they had hunted and lived since the beginning of time. But they remembered the teachings of this good man who told them about these strangers that would come from the east. And they came. And they brought with them their philosophy of manifest destiny. Land which was the source of much and many conflicts. There was too much land, obviously, that the Cheyennes and the Arapahos had reserved for themselves in this Great Horse Creek Treaty of 1851, which we also know as the Fort Marion Treaty. Those new immigrants to the territory of Colorado wanted that land, and those that were the officials of that new territory established in 1861 decided that indeed we had too much land, and another treaty was negotiated, the Fort Wise Treaty of 1861, which reduced our millions and millions and millions and millions of acres of land to a small reservation in southeastern Colorado, 1/13 size of our great land holdings. And of course, because we were viewed as obstacles to progress, there was the Sand Creek Massacre of 1864, because the new settlers of the territory of Colorado wanted to see Indian title extinguished to that new land area, resulted in ultimately the 1864 massacre along Big Sandy Creek, state of Colorado. An event that is even remembered by non-Indian historians as the most savage episode in Indian-white relationships. Let me just give you a very quick example of that savagery. Fetuses were cut from the wombs of their mothers. Babies were grabbed, toddlers were grabbed by their ankles and their brains bashed out on boulders. The private parts of men and women were cut out and displayed as trophies of war as the bloodless herd, now bloody, marched back in to what was then known as Denver City, where these human trophies were put on display in the Apollo Theater, the Denver Opera House. We were those obstacles that had to be exterminated. And almost 4 years to the day later, along the hillway, the Lodgepole River that we call the Wichita River today, there was another attack upon the same camp, who has been lauded, a chief who has been lauded as the most peaceable of all Cheyenne peace chiefs, Blackhead. A former Methodist minister had led those 700 soldiers to Sand Creek where that savagery and butchery occurred. His name is John Melton Shevington, a Methodist minister. The attack on Black Kettle's camp at the Lodgepole River was led by an individual referred to as the boy general of the Civil War, George Armstrong Custer. He led his sharpshooters and his soldiers to the village, and as they waited for dawn to come, the morning star shone so brightly that it almost lighted the entire encampment. Some say it was not the morning star, that it was another star, but that gave the name of Morning Star to this boy general of the West that we know as long hair Custer, George Armstrong Custer, who was called back to service because he had gone absent without leave to see his wife Libby, and was put on AWOL for a year without pay. He was called back to implement what the military leaders at the time called total war. Total war consisted of the death of all men of the Cheyenne nations to begin with. Kill all the men. Take all the women and children captives. Burn the entire food supply. Destroy all their personal possessions. The band under Black Kettle were called the people of beauty because of their magnificent beadwork and soft white buckskins. Same people who had been attacked at Sand Creek nearly 40 years before. So that was in 1868. In 1869, then President Ulysses S. Grant created an executive order reservation for the Cheyenne and Arapaho, a 4+ million acre reservation in what we now know to be the state of Oklahoma. And of course, total war let me make one more point, also insisted in killing pony herds of any of the tribes with whom they came into contact. Subsequently, the numbers of the ponies of the Cheyenne people, Black Kettle's Band, range upward from about nearly 700 to 900 ponies, horses. They were killed too. What have they ever done to the United States federal government? What had we ever done as the Cheyenne and the Arapaho people who have lived here for all time? Then, of course, they couldn't subdue us, was the term they used. And they implemented that total war and chased us all over the southern plains, the state plains of Texas, and a series of skirmishes that I call the Red River Wars of 1874 and 1875. One of their military commanders, one of their military officers was a white man who had graduated from West Point, who was the officer of the Black Tent Cavalry. The cavalry made up primarily of black soldiers who are referred to as the Buffalo Soldiers, 1874, 1875. Never mind that this country could chase us all over the face of our lands, but let us be trying to defend ourselves in the skirmishes, those war skirmishes in the Red River area, the State Plains area of Texas, of those that had dared to fight the United States government were then had to pay. And that is where our ancestors come in. They did not have a trial. People just said, he or she did this. He was a renegade. And they picked one woman whose name was Moquette, meaning little woman, a brave warrior woman who was sent off with the 33 Cheyenne and Arapaho people. 35. She was a female warrior woman. She had also fought alongside her husband at the Little Big Horn. Moquette, little woman, who Pratt described as being very slender, about 135 pounds, and fairly tall, maybe 5'7", went along as I will call them prisoners of war. They were shackled to once all of them had been selected for exile. What we have to understand is that the Cheyenne people view exile as the most drastic of any treatment or anything that can happen to us as a people. Usually it is the result of having committed intra-tribal murder, exile, for a period of 4 upwards to 10 years. Complete exile by themselves to live alone, which was a virtual death sentence in the environment of that time. Exile. So these warriors, Notahuel, those that had been created by the good man with the knowledge that he brought out of Bear Deep to protect us, to provide for us, to be of service to the Council of 44 Peace Chiefs. Some were sent off because they dared to protect oaths that they took when they became members of our various warrior society. And so they left. And in horror, the women watched them as steel poles were attached to the middle of the wagons. And those soldiers were put in shackles. their arms and legs shackled to the poles that ran down the middle of those wagons. And that's the way they left, with women crying, men shouting their courage songs, and they went south to join other prisoners, the Carlisle Comanches and the Catholics. And they were all shackled in the wagons as I have described them, taken to the nearest railroad and ultimately arriving at Fort Marion. The men did not know where they were going. I'm sure Mogiet did not either, but they were afraid that these veiled strangers, these veiled who did come from the east, were taking them to the ocean, to the river, to the edge of the earth to be thrown into the waters. That did not quite happen. They were confined at Fort Marion, as we know it to be. It has its own name in the National Park Service registry today. But they were confined in quarters where they could not even look out and see the beautiful seascapes that you probably have looked at today since you have been there. The only place that they could see the environment was to look up and see the sky above them. Many years ago, I made a trip to Fort Marion, and I was interviewed for a documentary put together by the American Experience series of the public broadcasting system. That documentary is called In the Image of a White Man. It talks about the educational system that Richard Henry Pratt created after his prisoners went home. Well, they became soldiers. They wore uniforms. They guarded themselves. Women came in. Richard Henry Pratt's wife, Anna Pratt, others, Sally Knocker, even Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, went in to teach these prisoners up for. They taught them to read, to write, and to speak English. In return, these prisoners taught them how to shoot bow and arrows. And they were often employed as luggage handlers at the railroad station in St. Augustine. Pratt found work for them in different ways. They helped pick the oranges. They did what they could to be self-sufficient, but some of the residents of Fort Marion later said, "Oh, you can't do that. Don't let them work. They're taking away our livelihood." And so even that was taken from them. They were often preached to by Bishop Whipple. They learned how to sing Christian hymns. They learned the Lord's Prayer. Many of them converted to Christianity. Monday. Operator David Pendleton. And after 3 years of captivity there were a few that were sent to Hampton Institute to be educated along with their relatives from the Black direction. A school for freed Black slaves at Hampton, Virginia, which still exists today as a university. But Richard Henry Pratt decided that they should be educated by themselves and created the Carlisle Indian Industrial Training School, a school for the Indian children of the nations who were first to love this land. Carlisle was the first of such schools, and by the end of the century, there were 25 off-reservation boarding schools aimed at total assimilation of these young people that were taken to be educated there. Their slogan was, "Kill the Indian, save the man." Destroy everything about them culturally, in terms of their identity and their lifeways, make them, as the documentary I told you about, which is about the boarding schools, into pale images of the white man. Generations attended those schools, and our native languages bore the frontal assault of assimilation. How dare we continue to speak our languages given to us at creation? How dare we continue to believe in our ways that were given to us, that came out of sacred Cherokee norms. And so some of them returned to Indian Territory. Some went to Hampton, but then all of them went to Carlisle in 1879. But while they were at Fort Marion, as stated already, there were some plaster masks made of their faces. David O'Crahater Pendleton was a brother to my great-grandfather Wolftime. He was also a brother to Coho, who was one of the prisoners of war, also sent to Fort Marion. There were three brothers. My grandfather's grandfather was young and did not go to Fort Marion. His name is Wolftime. So there was making medicine, Cohoeta, there was Coho, there was Wolftime, all brothers. And so Coho was also one of the better known. They all produced this phenomenal art, that a tradition that is still carried on today by Peace Chief Gordon Yellowman and by George Leva. Ledger art that tells about what camp life was as it used to be, and it also keeps a pictorial record of what life at Fort Marion was. And so, many years ago, when I went to visit at Harvard, after having taught there at one time, I went to the Peabody Museum, where I was told and we heard that the masks of these prisoners taken from Fort Marion were housed. I asked to see the plaster bust cast of David Pendleton O'Crahater. It was brought to me, and I got to see what our Cheyenne saint looked like. They were afraid to have the plaster casts made because they had to learn to breathe through straws that were pushed up their nostrils. And Richard Henry Pratt had to essentially model. He had to sit there and have a plaster cast made of his face with these straws stuck up his nostrils to show them that they could continue to breathe. For Pratt, these prisoners and their life at Fort Marion from 1875 to 1878 was a great experiment. And he decided that we could be educated as Cheyenne people, as indigenous people, as Hamawistanil. Of course we could be educated. We have created our own educational systems since the beginning of time. Competency-based educational systems. We were a very highly educated people. We were the first scientists, the first philosophers, the first botanists, the first biologists, the first medical doctors, the first of everything on this land, as were the other nations that were given life here and placed on this earth. Given their life ways to live, their languages to speak, And those schools, as I talked about, all reservation boarding schools and those schools on our reservation lands, our languages, so that today we are left having to preserve our sacred languages that were given to us at creation, the ways that we express our cultural ways as a people. I am very pleased to say that we have some junior apprentices learning our Cheyenne language, our Arapaho language, that they will carry with them into the future. And they will negate the calling of education that Richard Henry Pratt, soldier, become jailer, become educator, instituted in the schools that he helped create. We have survived. We are here. We have our tribal governments. You have our governor sitting in the audience with you. You have our culture bearers. You have our historians. You have Noreen Stark, a former student of the Cheyenne and Arapaho Tribal College. Yes, we value education, but we love our ways and our languages as a people. And now, we will no longer condone such slogans as kill the Indian, save the land. I want to thank you for being in the audience and for listening to me so respectfully. And I want to thank Blackler University for inviting me to share these few moments of time with you. The words of an elder, of an old woman who carries our stories in her heart and in her mind because of her great love for all of her grandchildren and all her relatives, especially our warriors who gave so much there at the place where you are sitting, where you are memorializing their experience, the great experience upon Richard Henry Pratt. So continue to learn from your time together, and I thank you again